Welcome to another edition of 106 Garage, and today I'm driving a 2018 Toyota Corolla Ascent. Now, in this video I explain why these are good second-hand cars, and why, if you're looking for a solid, dependable, reliable mode of transportation, you should really consider one of these. Now, this generation of Corolla started production in 2012 and ended production in 2018. This Corolla was one of Australia's best-selling cars. It was available both in manual and, as I'm driving, the automatic CVT form, as well as a hybrid with a CVT. It's a reasonable car. It's got a reasonable engine. It's got reasonable performance. So in all fairness, it should be a reasonable buy. Well, it's not as straightforward as that. There's quite a lot to this car, and to be fair, there are certain things you should look for and things that you should consider when buying a second-hand Corolla. Start with the driving dynamics. It's okay. It's not a bad car. This CVT box isn't the worst one I've driven. It still likes to hold revs and sound a bit like a mule, but as to all CVTs, it's not especially bad. Although the 6-speed manual I drove previously is a better car, but I gather that most people aren't going to be buying the 3-pedal option like I will. The handling on a high-speed road like this, relatively secure, could do with a bit more turn-in, a bit more steering feel, but on the whole, it's pretty good. You know where the wheels are, you know how it feels when it turns into the corner. It's nothing you should be worried about. Although, one thing they could do better is the suspension. It's just a little bit bouncy. It doesn't feel planted, it feels a bit bouncy, and that probably has to do with the fact that they're running relatively cheap shock absorbers, which probably might improve this car if you went and got a better set of shocks for it. Although in sedan form the rear end doesn't feel tied down, so the hatch is definitely the better one to drive. This CVT does come with a automatic mode with 7 speeds in it, and in 7th speed, 2,500 RPM, 100 k's an hour, and then goes into eco mode, which drops to 2,000 RPM. It's actually not a bad highway car. It's pretty good in a straight line. It's relatively refined for what it is. It's not, again, NVH could be a little better, but we are talking about a basic car here. So for what you get and what you expect, it does the job, which is good. The previous Corolla was quite revolutionary compared to the others in terms of styling. It was designed to be a lot more attractive than what had come before. This one is a bit more of an evolution of the previous car, but that's not a bad thing. It's not an ugly car. It has some interesting design features and touches, particularly the facelifted cars. The early cars looked a little bland. The facelifted cars, those rear lights and the front swoopy Toyota emblem, that gives it some style to it. But on the whole, you see them everywhere, so you kind of see it enough times, it just blends in. It's not the blandest shape in the world, but it's not the most interesting. It's average. The interior I actually don't mind. The way it's set up, there's no curvy dashes like I normally like, but it's set up very well, gives good ventilation. Driving position's actually pretty good, although the seat could be a little bit more comfortable. The material is a bit itchy scratchy, but on the whole, it's not bad. It's actually quite good in terms of driving position and in terms of interior, both accommodation and usability. All the switches are very easy to hand. It does feel a little bit cheap and plasticky, but of course we are discussing a very cheap car here. The instrumentation's nice and well laid out. It's a model of common sense. I do wish we did have temperature on a gauge rather than just being on the little screen, but everything else is pretty good. So it's surprisingly not a bad vehicle. And even though this is the base car and you don't get a whole lot for your money, you do get Bluetooth, you got your 6 curtain airbags and USB. Base car hasn't got the crash avoidance, but less to worry about, less to break, so not a bad thing. But your purpose of buying a Corolla is to buy a reliable vehicle. yes, it's okay, it's not going to scare you off when you drive it. You just want it to be passively reliable and cheap to run. And on the whole, it is reliable. The 1.8 litre engine's pretty much bulletproof. There isn't anything major to be concerned about. Most of the componentry is relatively durable. And if something breaks, parts are cheap. The only criticism I would have is the CVT transmission. Now, this is an Ace box. These are relatively good on the whole, but I still see them broken at auction. I still see CVT Corollas with transmission issues at auction. If you want to eliminate any issues for reliability and want something that's dependable in every conceivable way, buy the manual. But this one isn't too bad. However, one proviso: change the transmission fluid every 50 to 60,000 kilometers. You'll prolong the life of this gearbox, and you'll actually make this car very much future-proof because it's less likely to go wrong. CVTs mostly break because of lack of maintenance. And yes, they say don't change the transmission fluid. That's an absolute load of baloney. They want that transmission to break so you can go buy another car. Change the transmission fluid, as the car wizard showed in his video, which I've put a link below, which he has with a Nissan Cube with the less reliable Jacko box. Just change the fluid, because if you change the fluid, it'll make this thing a lot more reliable. And when you come to buy one, ask that question. If the answer is it has not been changed, then the minute you buy it, not leave it, minute you buy it, you change the transmission fluid. You'll regret it when the transmission breaks. But in terms of electronics, it's all stuff we've seen before with Toyotas. It's relatively consistent in terms of reliability. There isn't really a whole lot else to this car. It's quite reliable, it's quite cheap to buy. Well, it was cheap to buy when it was new, but that's not so much the case now. It's not so much the reliability or the car that would make me hesitate on a Corolla. It's what you're paying for it in 2022. This car, for the privilege of driving it, you need $22,000 to $23,000. Yeah, this thing was worth $22,990 new in manual form and $24,990 in automatic form. Let that sink in. You're paying a lot of money. Now, that's because of COVID prices shooting them up, but also I believe Toyotas in general of this vintage are highly regarded, and people needing a reliable car quite rightly think to this car first. And also, like with many cars that are used as Ubers, their values have shot up over the last 2 years because more people want to drive a car that they can double up as an Uber. So that means the prices for these things start at 10 grand for a 2012 manual Ascent with 200,000 Ks on it, rising all the way to 30 for low mileage, fully loaded ZRs from 2017, 2018, and hybrids. Actually, hybrids go up as high as 32. Yeah, that to me, yeah, it's a solid, reliable car, but that's a lot of money. That to me really makes me think you're just paying a lot. I know it's a good, reliable car, okay, transmission's a little bit of a question mark, but it's a lot of money you're spending on a second-hand car. And that's where there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, in terms of reliable cars of this vintage, your options in the automatic are pretty slim pickings. You've got the Mazda, the 2 litres, relatively reliable. You've got the Lancer, again, getting a bit on the dated side here. Not a bad car though. The Subaru, like the Lancer, is a CVT. But again, not the most unreliable car in the world. The base Impreza 2 litres, another one you'd think about. Civic, 9th gen yes, 10th, there's a few question marks on the 10th gen Civic, but 1.8 CVT ain't so bad. But Mazda aside, they're all CVTs. Still have the same issue. And anything else, Focus, Cruise, Golf, Megane, anything that has an auto box in those, they're troublesome. The fact is, there's that many troublesome automatics in this vintage, which is one of the reasons why Corollas are worth what they're worth. Because you can't buy a Cruise or a Focus as an auto, gearboxes fail left and right. Same with the Golf, same with the dual clutch Megane. If you subtract the auto option, those cars become quite reasonable ideas. Now, the dark horse in this group might actually be the Peugeot 308 with a torque converter box, even though it's powered by a 1.2 litre 3-cylinder turbo. May not be a bad idea, given what else is there. Does this car make sense at its current price point? Possibly. If I was spending 22 on one of these, it'd be between this car and a BN Series 2 litre Mazda 3. Now, quietly, I can probably get a better deal on the Mazda, the base 3 over this. They don't seem to have the strength of the following that this does. And maybe I think I-30 Serato, but again, there's question marks on that engine, on the 2 litre Hyundai engine. So I'd have to answer those on that car before I would think about it. But it'd be between this and the Mazda for me. If I was going for a 22 grand, medium-sized hatch, it's about 4 or 5 years old. Although I would go for the 3-pedaled option and save 2, 3, 4 grand, depending on what you're spending on the car. And I do mean the manual is a saving on the automatic that you can't ignore. It's worth at least thinking about. Now, the other thing that comes across my mind with this car is it's so expensive for what it is. You could buy a new car. If anything, the biggest thing that would stop me buying this vintage of Corolla is a brand new Suzuki Baleno. Now, the Baleno is slightly smaller than this. It's got a 1.4 litre engine, 4-speed automatic box that you find out of an old Swift. But it's fundamentally solid, it's fundamentally reliable. It's the sort of thing you're gunning for in a car like this. We know what the 1.4 litre engine is and the automatic box that's attached to it is like in terms of reliability. We've seen it on the previous generation FZ Suzuki Swift. It's pretty reliable. It's $20,990 for a brand new car with a 5-year warranty. These cars, because Toyota introduced a 5-year warranty after this generation, they're all out of warranty, they're all second-hand, and many of these are ex-rental, ex-fleet cars. Some of them are well cared for, some of them are treated like trash. You'd really have to make me think vis-a-vis whether I would buy this car over something new. That's the one thing that would make me think against this car. Yes, you could get a Picanto or an MG, but they are smaller cars. There is noticeably more space in this than a Picanto and an MG. The Suzuki, in terms of space, options, features, combination, that provides, in my eyes at least, the most comprehensive challenge to a car like this one. And deep down, many people probably would be thinking, why would I buy a used car when I could buy a new car that's almost the same size, more fuel efficient, slightly slower. The Baleno is slower than this, but it's new, no Ks on it, and this thing's got 80,000 Ks on it and out of warranty. It really would make me think long and hard about that. To me, if I was buying a Corolla, 15 grand, 13, 14, 15, manual ascent, anywhere between 85 and 170,000 kilometers with a manual gearbox. That to me is where this car makes the most sense, because it offers a reliable, faithful companion for a reasonable amount of money. And the manual is more fun to drive. But that's down to my personal preference. Always remember, like and subscribe.